Welcome to AP US History. This is Chapter 3, Part 6. We're going to pick up with the founding of New Jersey in 1664. This was a Quaker settlement. The Duke of York granted the area to two proprietors to set up this particular colony. The agriculture area and some industry there became a royal colony in 1702, as did New York, which came earlier. Delaware was granted its own assembly in 1703, contained a large Quaker population. Remained under the authority of the governor of Pennsylvania until the American Revolution. So, um, even though it will become a royal colony, it will fall under the jurisdiction of the Pennsylvania colony. In 17th century, you can see that New Jersey was originally colonized by the Swedes and then the Dutch, and then the British will seize it. Delaware was founded in 1638. Peter Minuit founded the Delaware colony. In 1604, Delaware became a separate royal colony. Colonial life in the middle colonies, what was it like? Most of the colonists were farmers. There was a stronger middle class there. Egalitarian, or this idea of equality under the law. And so most the settlers viewed themselves as equal to their neighbors. Upper class was found there, but the common people were far more numerous. Frontier had a leveling effect on social distinctions. If you could survive, well, you cut the mustard. You were an equal to your neighbor. Seemed to be kind of a melting pot for various athletic or ethnic groups. On balance, the settlers in the region experienced the greatest religious freedom. Probably, if you were looking at the colonies, the place that you would want to settle for religious freedom was probably at the top of the list would have been Rhode Island, and then Pennsylvania, and then Maryland. In terms of urban population growth, you can see that Philadelphia is going to be the largest, one of the largest cities in the British colonies. New York is going to grow. Boston is going to grow. Charleston seems to be lagging behind, and that's in the southern region. Big ideas about the colonies. Well, there were some similarities among the 13 colonies. They were mostly English, possessed British freedoms, believed that they were Englishmen, as the folks back in England. Had a concept of self government, but maybe not all of them as democratic as some. Some degree of religious tolerance, particularly in the Middle Colony and Rhode Island, and to a lesser extent, Maryland. Certain degree of economic opportunity. If you could come over, you could hack your livelihood out of the wilderness if you could survive the Indians. Educational opportunities, mostly in New England. The least educated of the colonies was the South. Primarily the aristocrats educated their own. Poor folks were left to fend for themselves. So that's going to be a hindrance to them. Uh, Differences among the three colonial regions is New England, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, New Hampshire. These were the New England colonies, predominantly Puritans. Certainly, they came for religious freedoms, but when they got here, they didn't grant too much to newcomers. So you either were a Puritan or you were pretty much an outcast, and they persecuted people who weren't necessarily Puritans. They had in the New England colonies they had some political participation in town halls, meetings. You had to be a church member and also a landowner to vote. No women voting, of course. no Indians, and no certainly African Americans. They had more industry there, a little more diverse in terms of timber and shipbuilding and fishing and so forth. It was the poorest of all the land in the colonies. Typically, you had small farms. Certainly restrictive on personal behavior. You were expected to toe the line religiously. There was a code of conduct, and you had to follow it, or you were going to be punished. The middle colonies, New York, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Delaware, um, at least excluding New York, um, there was more religious freedoms and more democratic values exercised. What you can say that they all shared is really a diverse population. Certainly, there was more religious freedoms than the other two regions. Quakers were the dominant force in Pennsylvania as well as Delaware and New Jersey. But you also have Swedes and Finns and Dutch. Promoted democratic values, got along with the Indians pretty well. Certainly had a mixed economy, less diverse than New England, but there were a certain amount of commerce going on. Farming was the primary industry. Uh, you don't find a lot of slaves there, as well as you don't find a lot of slaves in New England. Certainly, there was a strong middle class that developed in this region, um, and so that's going to make it a little more democratic because people seeing themselves as equals. Now, talking about the southern colonies, Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, um, mostly plantation, rich soil in this region. The main crops that they grew were tobacco, rice, and indigo, the cash crops. Uh, and the greatest concentration of slaves are going to be in this region. So most of the slaves that come from West Africa are going to end up in the South. Certainly, it was the most aristocratic in nature. A lot of poor folks there. Some religious tolerance, but you pretty much had to be part of the Anglican Church. Population was scattered, not really a great sense of community. It's pretty much every man for himself. Least democratic, little industry, good farmland again, and so people make a good living there. And we'll end right there.